For a long time, people tried to put Shedeur Sanders into a very small box. Just a quarterback. Just another talented athlete riding momentum. Just another name in a long list of promising players. But that narrative officially collapsed the moment Shedeur stepped off the field and onto a completely different stage. One that has nothing to do with touchdowns, playbooks, or locker rooms. Because what just happened didn't just shake football. It rattled the fashion world, the business world, and the entire idea of how modern athletes build power. Shedeur Sanders didn't sign a normal endorsement deal. He didn't slap his name on a product and call it a day. Instead, he made a move so unexpected that it forced two industries to stop and pay attention at the same time. An $80 million partnership with luxury fashion powerhouse AMIRI, capped by a runway debut in Paris. Let that sit for a second. Paris. High fashion. An NFL quarterback walking the same runway reserved for global style icons. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This was a statement. And here's the part most people are missing. This isn't about clothes. It's not about photo shoots. It's not even about fashion. This is about leverage. It's about influence. It's about an athlete understanding his value earlier than almost anyone before him, and using that value to move like a CEO instead of a rookie. While critics were still debating his draft position and box scores, Shedeur was quietly positioning himself in rooms where real power gets built. What makes this moment so fascinating is that it didn't come out of nowhere. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a brand taking a wild gamble. It was the result of a mindset that most players never adopt until it's too late. Shedeur has been playing a long game from day one, and this AMIRI deal is just the most visible proof yet. Because once you pull back the curtain, you start to realize something unsettling for the doubters. The fashion deal is just the headline. The real story is how Shedeur has been stacking ownership, equity, and influence behind the scenes while everyone else was focused on contracts and highlights. And when you trace the pattern backward, from Paris to Nike to Gatorade, you begin to see that this isn't just success. It's a blueprint. And the move he made before all of this, the one most people brushed off at the time, explains everything that's happening right now. The reason this AMIRI deal hit so hard is because it confirmed something a lot of people were refusing to admit. Shedeur Sanders isn't reacting to opportunities as they come, he's engineering them. And the proof of that mindset showed up long before Paris Fashion Week ever entered the conversation. Before the runway, before the luxury brands, before the headlines screaming $80 million, there was a decision that quietly separated Shedeur from almost every young athlete in the league. A decision most people didn't fully understand at the time. Gatorade came to him with a deal that would have been life-changing for almost anyone else. $60 million, 3 years, guaranteed, clean, simple, the kind of offer you're told never to overthink. Shedeur overthought it anyway. Instead of taking the check and moving on, he asked a question that most athletes never even consider. What happens after the campaign ends? That single question changed everything. Rather than locking himself into a traditional endorsement, Shedeur pushed for equity, ownership, a piece of the machine instead of just a seat in the ad. Reports claim he walked away with a stake tied directly to Gatorade USA's long-term performance, a move that doesn't just pay now, but keeps paying as the brand grows. That's when the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't someone chasing fast money. This is someone positioning himself where time works in his favor. Equity compounds, influence compounds, visibility compounds. And while other athletes are still focused on the size of the check, Shedeur is focused on what the check can become. And that mindset explains why AMIRI didn't just want him wearing clothes. They wanted him representing something. Luxury brands don't throw numbers like that around unless they see cultural gravity. They weren't buying a football player. They were buying relevance, credibility, and connection to a generation that doesn't respond to traditional marketing anymore. But here, where it gets even more interesting. The same people who once questioned whether Shedeur deserved major endorsement money before proving himself on the field are now watching him dominate off it. And suddenly, the conversation is shifting. Because this level of business execution doesn't come from hype, it comes from clarity. And once you look at what happened next, the moment he officially stepped onto an NFL field, it becomes clear that the AMIRI deal wasn't the peak. It was just the confirmation. Everything escalated the moment Shedeur Sanders officially stepped onto an NFL field. That's when the business side of his story stopped being theoretical and started becoming undeniable reality. Because buried inside his early Nike agreement was a clause most people overlooked, one that would only activate once he became an active NFL player. And the second that happened, the numbers exploded. The original deal was already historic. A reported $125 million Nike contract for a player who hadn't taken a single professional snap yet. Analysts called it premature. Fans called it hype. Critics said it was reckless, but Nike wasn't guessing, they were anticipating. The moment Shedeur played, the contract instantly doubled to $250 million, triggered automatically by his status change. No renegotiation, no debate. Just leverage kicking in exactly as designed. That detail matters more than people realize. Nike didn't panic. They didn't hesitate. They activated the clause because the infrastructure was already in place. That tells you this wasn't a gamble, it was a forecast. And Shedeur didn't stop there. He negotiated something almost unheard of in modern sports endorsements. 50% of all jersey sales tied directly to his name. Read that again, 50%. That's not normal. That's not standard. That's not even common for generational superstars in their prime. Yet here was a young quarterback securing a revenue stream that grows with fan engagement instead of staying capped by salary structures. And when the season unfolded, the results backed it up. Shedeur reportedly sold hundreds of thousands of jerseys, outperforming multiple higher-drafted players and established names. This is where the narrative officially breaks. Draft position stopped mattering. Rookie labels stopped mattering. Because while others were celebrating contracts, Shedeur was collecting from movement, from culture, from momentum. The money didn't just come from playing well, it came from people wanting to be associated with what he represents. And that's the through line connecting everything. Football, fashion, endorsements, none of it exists in isolation. Each move feeds the next. Nike validated his commercial pull. Gatorade validated his long-term vision. AMIRI validated his cultural reach on a global stage. And yet somehow, this still wasn't the full picture. Because once you zoom out and look at what Shedeur was building beyond endorsements, outside of shoes, jerseys, and runway shows, you start to realize that the empire doesn't stop at partnerships. It multiplies. What separates Shedeur Sanders from most athletes isn't the size of the deals, it's the structure behind them. While others chase the biggest upfront check, Shedeur keeps positioning himself where the money keeps flowing long after the headlines fade. That mindset shows up clearly when you look beyond Nike and fashion, and into the businesses he chose to build himself. Instead of slapping his name on random products, he moved with intent. An apparel line that directly taps into his young, loyal fanbase. A signature barbecue sauce that leans into his roots and family identity. A partnership with EA Sports that keeps him embedded in gaming culture, where millions of fans interact daily. These weren't side hustles. They were calculated entry points into industries that don't disappear when football ends. And then there's the Brady connection. Teaming up with Tom Brady's wellness and apparel company wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic alignment. One generation passing knowledge to the next. One brand lending credibility while the other brings relevance and reach. That partnership alone signals how seriously Shedeur is being taken behind closed doors in business circles, not just locker rooms. What's wild is how early this all started. Long before most players are even thinking about post-career planning, Shedeur was already talking about resources, longevity, and ownership. Not fame, not flash, ownership. That's a different frequency, and it explains why brands keep lining up to work with him. They're not dealing with an athlete chasing checks, they're dealing with a partner thinking in decades. But here, what makes this even more dangerous for anyone still doubting him? Through all of this expansion, Shedeur hasn't distanced himself from the culture that made him valuable in the first place. He didn't sanitize his image. He didn't dilute his voice. He didn't become corporate. That authenticity is the asset. Luxury brands don't just want reach anymore, they want credibility. They want someone who can move seamlessly between locker rooms, runways, and boardrooms without losing trust from any side. That's why the AMIRI deal landed the way it did. It wasn't just about clothes, it was about access. Access to a generation that sees Shedeur as real, not manufactured. And once a brand has that access, the ceiling changes completely. Because at this point, Shedeur Sanders isn't just building wealth. He's building infrastructure. And the scariest part, this still looks like the early stages. And this is where the conversation really shifts. Because once you zoom out, you realize Shedeur Sanders isn't playing the same game as everyone else in his generation. Most athletes wait for validation. They wait for Pro Bowls, playoff runs, or media approval before leveraging their name. Shedeur flipped that formula. He understood something early that most players don't learn until it's too late. Attention is temporary, but ownership compounds. That's why draft position never defined him. While fans argued over where he was selected, he was already outperforming first-round names in jersey sales, brand value, and cultural reach. Selling hundreds of thousands of jerseys as a rookie wasn't just a flex, it was proof of concept. Proof that the market responds to connection, not labels. Proof that influence beats optics. And here's the uncomfortable truth some people don't want to say out loud. If football disappeared tomorrow, Shedeur would still be winning. That's the power position he's built. No desperation, no pressure to take bad deals, no need to cling to a system that doesn't serve him. Every move he makes now is optional, not necessary, and that changes how negotiations go. This is why brands keep giving him leverage most athletes never see. They're not betting on a season, they're betting on a blueprint. And when you understand that, the AMIRI deal doesn't look shocking anymore. It looks inevitable. And here's the part that really separates Shedeur Sanders from the rest: intentional positioning. Nothing about his rise has been accidental. While most young athletes chase visibility, Shedeur focuses on alignment. Every partnership he takes reinforces the same story: culture, control, and longevity. That's why his brand doesn't feel forced. It feels inevitable. Look at the pattern: fashion, beverages, gaming, apparel, wellness. These aren't random endorsements stacked on top of each other. They're ecosystems. Each one feeds the other. Each one expands his reach into a different audience without diluting who he is. That's rare, especially at his age. And it's why luxury brands are paying attention. High fashion doesn't just sell clothes anymore. It sells identity. It sells relevance. It sells proximity to culture. And right now, culture is being driven by athletes who don't just perform, they influence. Shedeur isn't stepping into that world late. He's entering it at the exact moment luxury brands are desperate to stay connected to younger, more authentic audiences. That's why walking a Paris runway matters. It's not about modeling, it's about symbolism, a signal that the walls between sports, fashion, and business are officially gone. Shedeur isn't crossing over, he's standing in the middle. What makes this even more impressive is how calm he's been through it all. No rush, no panic, no loud declarations, just quiet leverage. He doesn't oversell himself because he doesn't need to. The demand is already there. And here's what people miss. This isn't a peak, it's a foundation. Most athletes hit their biggest brand moments after retirement. Shedeur is building his while the story is still being written on the field. That gives him time. Time to scale, time to pivot, time to say no. Which leads to the real takeaway. Shedeur Sanders isn't chasing legacy later. He's engineering it now. And once you see the bigger picture, it becomes clear why Shedeur Sanders is being talked about differently than every other athlete in his class. This isn't hype, it's leverage. While most players wait for performance to unlock opportunity, Shedeur flipped the formula. He built value before the peak, which means every snap he takes now multiplies what already exists. That's a dangerous position to be in for brands, for leagues, and for anyone still trying to measure him by traditional standards. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Football is no longer the center of his universe. It's the accelerator. Everything he does on the field feeds the business machine off it. Jerseys move faster, partnerships gain credibility, cultural relevance compounds. And unlike athletes who burn out chasing attention, Shedeur lets the ecosystem work for him. That's why comparisons don't work. Draft position doesn't apply. Contract structures don't explain it. Even traditional endorsement logic falls apart when equity, ownership, and long-term control enter the conversation. He's not playing the same game, he's playing a different timeline. And that's what makes this moment so important. The AMIRI deal isn't the headline, it's the signal. A signal that luxury brands are no longer waiting for athletes to prove themselves the old way. They're betting on influence, narrative, and cultural gravity. Shedeur checks every box without compromising who he is. What happens next is where things get really interesting. Because once an athlete proves he can move fashion, move product, move culture, and still perform on the field, the ceiling disappears. At that point, brands stop negotiating short-term deals. They start asking one question: how close can we get? And Shedeur Sanders has already shown he knows the answer. He doesn't chase proximity, he controls access. That's why this story isn't about an $80 million deal. It's about a shift in power, a shift in how athletes build empires, and a shift in who gets to define success in modern sports. And the scary part, he's just getting started. What Shedeur Sanders is doing right now isn't just impressive, it's disruptive. For decades, athletes were told the same story: play first, earn later. Perform on the field, stay quiet, and wait your turn for endorsements once your legacy was secure. Shedeur flipped that model completely. He understood something most players don't realize until it's too late: influence has a shelf life, but ownership lasts forever. The AMIRI deal, the equity play with Gatorade, the Nike structure, the jersey revenue split, none of these moves happened by accident. They're part of a larger strategy built on leverage, timing, and cultural relevance. Shedeur didn't wait for permission. He didn't wait for validation. He positioned himself early, negotiated boldly, and bet on long-term upside instead of short-term comfort. And that's the real takeaway here. This isn't about football versus fashion. It's about control. It's about understanding that being great at your craft is only half the equation. The other half is knowing how to protect your value, multiply it, and pass it forward. Shedeur has been vocal about legacy, about setting up future generations, about building something that outlives highlight reels and stat sheets. And unlike most people who talk about it, he's actually executing. That's why this moment matters. We're watching the rise of a new athlete archetype, one who understands business as deeply as competition, who blends authenticity with strategy, and who refuses to be boxed into outdated systems. The league may evaluate him by wins and losses, but the world is watching something bigger unfold. Shedeur Sanders isn't just changing how athletes get paid. He's changing how they think. And once that shift happens, there's no going back.